You're live, so go ahead.
Good, all right. Good evening and welcome to the City of Topeka Planning Commission meeting. We are a commission appointed by the mayor and city council to plan for the orderly growth and development of the community, to hold public hearings and to make recommendations to the city council on planning items. Please note that the city council rules state that the public hearings for planning cases shall be conducted solely by the planning commission. No additional public hearings will be conducted by city council. Tonight's cases are tentatively scheduled to be heard by the City Council next month. Agendas can be found at topeka.org. For cases that require public hearings, the procedure will be as follows. First, the planning staff will summarize the case. Next, we will hear from the applicant or their representative. Then we will receive public testimony. Public comments should be addressed solely to the chair and are limited to 4 minutes. Amanda, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Dean,
Here.
Ms. Herron,
Here.
Mr. Kaut,
Here.
Ms. Pearson,
Here.
Mr. Tobabin,
Here.
Mr. Warner.
Here.
6 members are present.
Oh, Ms. Herron? Is she here?
Oh, Mr. Nigger, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I am here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now for approval of minutes of the May 15, 2023 meeting. I think it's any closer.
Mr. Dean,
Oh,
No, you're good. You're good.
hold on a second.
We're trying to figure out.
Is that better? Can you hear? Approval of minutes. I'm open for a motion.
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Thank you. Any comments? Not. Amanda, please take the roll.
Mr. Dean,
Aye.
Ms. Herron,
Aye.
Mr. Kaut,
Abstain.
Mr. Nager,
Aye.
Ms. Pearson,
Aye.
Mr. Tobabin,
Abstain.
Mr. Warner.
Abstain.
Minutes, the approval of the minutes pass 4-0 with 3 abstaining.
Thank you. Now on to declaration of conflict of interest or ex parte communications by members of the commission or staff.
On item CU 23, Patterson Family Toddler Center, I sit on a committee that is working on the facility. I don't think it's a conflict of interest to vote. I don't feel like I would be impartial in any way, but I wanted to make sure to disclose that and that my husband could possibly be building the facility, but I don't feel that it would affect my ability to vote today.
Okay. Any others? If not, we will move into action items. Action item number 1 is a public hearing of Z23-10 RT Properties.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. The case today is Z2310 by RT Properties LLC. The request is to amend the district zoning map from R1 Single Family Dwelling District to C2 Commercial District. Going into the aerial. Okay. Oops. Okay. Okay, the property contains 0.3 acres of a 6.8 acre parcel, and it's located at the northeast corner of the intersection of Southeast 45th Street and Horseshoe Bend Drive. More importantly, this is a very small tract of land of the owner's larger, nearly 7-acre parcel of property at the corner of 45th and Horseshoe Bend Drive. The rezoning is a remnant of a 1962 zoning case that rezoned the broader area from single-family dwellings to commercial uses. The purpose of the rezoning is to allow the owner to develop the corner of the intersection as well as the frontage of the intersection for commercial uses. I'll go into the zoning map here. Yeah, okay. Just going into the background a little bit of the area. So that zoning case, the historic zoning case, included everything within the boundary of the C2 here. As you can see, the west boundary line and then the east boundary line, everything included in that was part of that 1962 zoning case, including the R1 and the I1, which is light industrial. Well, that was subsequently rezoned in the later 60s. This particular tract of land was left out of that zoning change because there was a house on it at the time. In fact, there was a house until very recently, within the past year. It was demolished, so essentially this is a cleanup of the zoning. The property owner is entitled to develop their land for commercial uses. This essentially doesn't make any significant changes to how they could develop their land. There was a house there at the time in 1962. It was recently demolished, and they're rezoning it now. The property, we have not had any opposition or comments to this, except for one email you have in your packet. I think more importantly, the area that is zoned light industrial was all zoned in the 1960s for light industrial uses. The commercial area was zoned in the 1960s for light industrial uses. This does not change how the owner can develop the land. They're entitled for commercial uses here at the intersection. Staff is recommending approval, and I am open for questions that you may have. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
I'll let you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? If not, is the applicant present today?
Good evening, Jeff Lawback, SBB Engineering, the civil consultant for RT Properties for this rezoning. Annie did a great job. Basically, we're just trying to rezone a little corner of the 0.3 acres of the overall 7-acre tract to C2 zoning. Here for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thanks.
Public testimony. Questions for the public by any public questions or comment on this zoning issue? Not. Oh, go ahead.
My name is Henry McClure. Good evening. Thank you. Ed Lindquist Jr. is a client of mine, and over the years, I've worked on the light industrial land that he has across the way. I've known Ed since 4th grade. And, you know, we've been thinking about selling it or developing it and adding more. But I spoke to Ed, and he was supposed to have wrote a letter for y'all in favor of this. So he has the eye light to the, just to the west, and storage max and some vacant land. And he also we've also over the years contributed to a benefit district to put the road in and some other improvements, but we welcome this. This is a great deal. I hope you guys support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public testimony for this item? If not, we'll close the public testimony and move on to the discussion by commissioners. Any discussion on the item? If no discussion, I'd be open for a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Help?
Mr. Chairman, I would move a recommendation to the governing body of approval of the rezoning from R1 to C2 as prepared by the staff, and the adoption of the staff's report and findings as those of the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Have a second?
I'll second.
Are you here?
Yes, I believe so.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion on the motion? If not, would you please take the roll? Vote.
Mr. Warner,
Aye.
Mr. Chobabin,
Aye.
Ms. Pearson,
Aye.
Mr. Nager,
Aye.
Mr. Kaut,
Aye.
Ms. Herron,
Aye.
and Mr. Dean.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Now moving on to public hearing of CU 23-01, Asian property for Care Paravel Latin School. Start with the staff presentation, please.
Thank you. This is a request by the school for a conditional use permit to allow for an off-street parking lot in association with their school, which is located at 635 Southwest Clay Avenue, just to the north. And the property is currently zoned R2, Single Family Dwelling District. Property itself is located south of Southwest 7th Street, and it lies between Buchanan and Clay. They're proposing a 3-phase project. As I've outlined, as I circled, I've kind of highlighted the areas for each phase. I'll get into that in a second. The proposal is to allow the parking lot strictly in association with the school. The entire area is zoned R2, Single Family Dwelling District. This CUP, conditional use permit, does not change the base zoning of the property. It only allows the added use of a parking lot that's tied to the school. The subject property has been vacant since the houses were removed along Buchanan and between 2018 and 2020. I'll go on here. Okay, going into the project. It's proposed in 3 phases. The area outlined in green would comprise the first phase. That includes 35 stalls. It's located at the southwest corner of 7th Street in Buchanan. That also includes their stormwater detention pond. The pond itself will be designed and constructed all within Phase 1 to handle runoff for the entire project. Phase 1 is expected to be completed by the end of this summer if they run on time frame, within their time frame. Phase 2, they're planning that for sometime after 2025. That's the area shown in red over here, both to the west and the east of the alley and south of 7th Street. That would be for additional 38 stalls, expected sometime after 2025. Phase 3 is a little further down in the future. That's south of Phase 1 along Buchanan Street, the area outlined in blue. That would come sometime after 2028, and it takes into account a possible future expansion to the school. So that's what they're planning that one for. So that's a little later on in the future. But as I mentioned, they're constructing their stormwater pond for the entire project. Going into the plan a little further, the site plan, they've provided a landscape plan. Actually, here's the next slide here just shows how Phase 1 would be constructed. The houses along 7th Street will not be removed until they come in later on and develop Phase 2. The property that's where they're going to develop Phase 3 will be maintained as open space with mature trees. Here's their overall landscape plan for the entire project. The site plan denotes setbacks along the frontages of both 7th, Buchanan, and Clay to ensure some separation from the residential uses across the street. The alley itself will remain a public alley. No access is proposed off the alley. That was actually a concern of our Public Works Department, that they'd have access directly onto the alley. They have removed that, and all their access will be taken directly off of the public streets. They've provided their overall landscape plan, which is shown here. At the time of site plan review, they'll have to do a more detailed landscape plan showing quantities and species for each phase as they come in and develop it. Okay, the property is within the Old Town neighborhood. This particular area of the neighborhood is designated residential urban core. This is the area that's anchored by a number of institutional uses. Care Paravel is considered one of those uses. The plan encourages the expansion of schools as they help to maintain and ensure the neighborhood's vitality. The intent of the conditional use permit is only to allow for the single parking lot in association with the school. And also it helps to control and limit the spread of parking lots further into the neighborhood. Residents along Buchanan were already demolished, so this does not remove any residences until they come in 2025 to build Phase 2. This also provides an active use on the property, which helps to ensure the vacant properties are maintained. Additionally, the parking lot reduces congestion and overcrowding along neighborhood residential streets, which was a concern of both the neighborhood and the school. Based upon the findings and analysis in the staff report, staff is recommending approval, and I'm open for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Annie, is there any questions for staff?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Andy, 2 questions about the detention pond.
Sure.
Does city code require any fencing around?
City code does not necessarily require fencing around the pond. No, that is up to them if they want to do that.
As the
And
applicant,
if they do establish fencing, it will have to be accordance to city standards and the fence regulations.
okay, I will ask the applicant about that then. The other question is there an outlet for the detention pond?
That would be reviewed as part of the stormwater management plan that's submitted when they come in for site plan review.
Okay,
They
thank
have
you.
not gone into that detail yet.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff? Yes.
Hey, Annie, could you explain to me how this is going to reduce traffic?
Currently, the school district, I'll do my best. Currently, the school has cutback parking. They've relied on cutback parking along public streets. It now provides for an off-street parking lot for the school to have, for where both visitors and employees of the school will be allowed to park.
So it's not actually cutting down traffic?
It is eliminating congestion on the public streets because it allows parking for visitors to the school.
But they still have to get onto the street, right?
That is correct, yes.
All right, thank you. Do we know the growth of that area?
Do we know
The growth of that area? Is it the school that's growing? Is the neighborhood growing? Is anything growing over there?
I will let the applicant address that question about how their school is growing. I do understand they need parking. They're also working with the city on a parking plan for how pickup and drop-off will be provided, changes to their pickup and drop-off that's during those hours. And that is not really directly tied to the CUP, but is in conjunction with the CUP.
So will we be able to see that at some point?
The pickup,
And
You may
drop-off
have
plan?
it-
I didn't,
If the applicant would like to provide that to you, yes. But it's not directly tied to their request for a conditional use permit.
okay, but we can ask for it.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Yes, Nager?
I was looking, first of all, thank you for the larger print. It's easier to read, which I appreciate. And looking at that, my understanding is that there are 3 current homes that will be demolished. Is that right?
Yes, there are 3 current homes on 7th Street. Those will not be demolished until they develop Phase 2 in 2025.
All right.
And my understanding is they own those houses and they are using them for uses that are part of the school. So they're using them for temporary classrooms, I believe.
All right.
They're not functioning as houses.
All right. And then also, within the staff report, there was mention that by creating this parking lot, that might help prevent a decline in property values in the neighborhood. I was curious how like that conclusion was come to, because I guess my understanding is the city is looking at like reducing excessive parking where it is excessive in hopes of increasing property tax revenue. So this just seemed kind of different thinking than that. So I was trying to understand and follow.
I think the thought is that they're providing an active use here, and it's being maintained as an active use rather than left as a vacant property and sold off to someone else who's not maintaining it for not maintaining the property and keeping it up.
Right.
So that as a whole, if anybody wants to, as long as if you have somebody with an active use there maintaining the property, that potentially can help property values in the area.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? If not, is the applicant present to speak on this issue?
Good evening, Jeff Lawback, SBB Engineering, the civil engineering consultant for Care Parabel on this project. To answer one of the questions regarding stormwater, that will be addressed at site plan review, but there is an underground storm sewer on the west side of Clay Street. So we will connect the stormwater from the west side of the alley, take it underground to the east side. Kind of our initial thought is to do the underground ADS system for the water quality treatment and have the above grade, which will be dry. So from a visual standpoint, it won't be wet holding water, except for, in that 10-year, 100-year rainfall, it would actually back up into the system and then be released over, that 24 to 40 hour time frame. So I hope that answers one of the questions. Here for any other questions specifically.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
Can you speak to the growth of the school?
I know HTK and us and some other sub-consultants are working on a current edition. And so that's kind of one of the reasons to start this phased, parking plan. But they're, unfortunately, the school representative couldn't be here tonight to speak specifically to what their, future growth is. But I do know that they do have plans for growth.
So just for the record, do you know how many students in the neighborhood attend this school?
I do not.
It says that can you speak to the pickup and drop-off plan?
So we were forwarded a study that the city actually did that recommended 7th Street be a one-way going west for pickup, drop-off to just remove the congestion and to keep the traffic going in one direction. And those were only, for certain hours of the day in the morning and pickup time. So that could be addressed during site plan review, but there is no, with the parking lot, our only access point is off Buchanan and Clay. So that should not add any congestion to 7th Street with the one way. And that's why we did get city comments to remove connections to the alley to avoid, people trying to use the alley more frequently in conjunction with the parking lot.
But it will increase congestion on to Buchanan Street.
Potentially. I mean, there is currently people parking along the neighboring streets. So that's the main goal of this, is to alleviate some of that congestion of people parking along the street and get them in a parking lot where it's a safer condition.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Nager?
It sounds like I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but about the pickup and drop off plan. So my understanding is that those drivers would not be, like, if you're dropping off your kid at the beginning of school, you're not going to be parking, you're going to be going through this one-way situation. So those parents would not be using this parking lot?
I mean, they could be. I think this is, especially this first phase, and initially for staff. But I know from picking and dropping off my son from middle school that there's people that use the one way, and then there's some people, if there's open spots in a parking lot, you might want to avoid that congestion. You go to a parking lot and have your kid meet you there. So it's but I think the one way will, as pointed out in the study that the city had done, avoid or help the safety issue and help the flow of traffic through this area.
And you said that, like, the first phase would be kind of targeted at accommodating staff. Do you happen to know how many staff work there or happen to choose to drive to commute?
I do not have those numbers. I mean, there is some current parking on site as well. So this is obviously adding to the available spots. So yeah, in the statement of operation that we provided the city, I don't think that they specifically said if this was all going to be staff parking or parent drop off. I mean, it's going to be used to alleviate the parking along the street.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? If not, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we will move into public testimony. Each person will have 4 minutes to speak. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak on this case? If not, we will close the public testimony and move on to discussion by commissioners. Is there any discussion on this case?
I guess I'm just concerned that the reasons that are being presented to us really will not solve a problem. I actually go through this area in the morning, or I attempt to, and so I understand that there is congestion over there. I'm not sure adding a parking lot, especially when you're talking about most of that congestion is created by drop-offs, pickup and drop-offs. And it only happens a couple of times during the day. Of course, in the morning when they're dropped off, and of course, in the afternoon when they're picked up. The parking lot seems excessive, especially if we don't know how much the school is growing, if the school is growing. It doesn't, the school is though it's been in the neighborhood for a number of years, I'm not sure how much it's contributing to the growth and development of the neighborhood either. So for those reasons, I don't believe I think this proposal needs more work at the very minimum. We need more information.
Any other comments on it? Nager?
I share some of those concerns that Commissioner Pearson said, especially not knowing like how many staff and how many students and like having those exact numbers and how they relate to the number of parking spots that they determined. Also, I meant to say this earlier during questions for staff, but I just noticed that in the neighborhood meeting report, there was one point where Shamika asked some questions, and then the notes for the response is just that the questions were responded to, which it's not a huge thing, but I prefer that we have some more detail of like if we shared Shamika's concerns that we could see like what the response was.
Also, didn't Shamika ask for another meeting? The follow-up?
Yes. That was one of the things that Shamika.
Yes.
Did she get that
Yes,
follow-up?
they did have a follow-up meeting at the school. Yes.
Do we have notes from that?
No, we do not have notes from the meeting. There were, Cassandra Taylor was there as well, and she didn't express any significant concerns or any opposition. But no, we don't have.
So my recollection of one of the main issues that was discussed at the first meeting and the second meeting was the neighborhood was not so much concerned about the parking lot. They wanted to be able to find a home for those houses. So if they were removed, that they could find a home in the neighborhood. And so I don't know how that was exactly resolved, but I think they need to find someone who's willing to take the homes, first of all. But they did have the second meeting. They discussed that. The representatives of the neighborhood did not follow up and ask for more information. They appeared to be satisfied with the answer they got at that time, what was available.
Mike, were you saying they wanted to move the homes?
If I recall,
Right.
yeah,
Yes,
go
they
ahead.
did want to move the homes. They asked us to talk with our housing division to see if there was some possibility that housing could contribute funding for that. Carrie Higgins indicated no, the city would not be able to contribute, didn't have any means of being able to provide additional funding for relocating the houses.
So was she just trying to preserve additional housing in a neighborhood that doesn't get much investment in it?
She wanted to find some means of relocating the houses, whether the neighborhood would purchase them and relocate them or the city would.
So she's looking
Yeah,
for
she's
more.
looking for some way to relocate the homes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Culp?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not a fan of parking lots either, okay? Big ones or small ones. But the ground has already been leveled. It's kind of hard to, except for the houses along Clay, I guess you're saying, but the houses along Buchanan are already gone. It's really hard to imagine that area developing for residential purposes over time.
Actually, I just walked by there this morning and I thought, man, someone should build a house there. And yeah, so.
Well,
yeah.
it's
If you hold it hostage, no one can develop it.
But The question then becomes whether the school would turn over property for residential development in that proximity to the school itself. I'm sure that's an asset to them to hold on to it, and I got mixed feelings about it, but I think it's okay in my book.
Thank you.
Yes.
I do see some potential benefits to the off-street parking. In a neighborhood where you have a school like this that can generate quite a few people wanting to park along the street, sometimes it can actually create some congestion. You can have drivers circulating looking for a parking space. So, I mean, there is a potential. Now, I don't know the areas as well as some of our other council members, but I do know that if we can reduce, if there is a lot of on-street parking, getting that parking off-street can reduce some circulation, can make an area a little less congested, can even make pedestrians a little more visible at times. So I do think there are some potential benefits to this.
I guess that's why I'd like to at least see the pickup drop-off plan that's going to happen, because again, the parking, if they are told to do pickup and drop-off in a particular way, that parking lot is not going to impact that traffic.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and some schools actually require you only do it one way.
Right.
And so the parking lot will not alleviate anything.
Mm-hmm.
Could I ask, Commissioner, you mentioned the pickup and drop off a couple times. So you end up with cars stacked out on the street?
Yeah, actually, you can't. And I'm thinking of when I go pick up my granddaughter, and the school that she is at requires that you can only do pick up and drop off one way. And yes, the cars can end up out into the street. They go through the parking. Actually, in this one, they go through a parking lot up to the door and then drop them back off into the street. So it doesn't really help. You're still going to be stuck if you're driving through that area.
And then stacking is on 7th Street. Is that
Yeah,
what's happening?
I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about in my experience, when a school has a pickup drop-off zone, that
Right.
it can create a whole different problem that this parking lot will not solve.
Gotcha.
So it would be nice to be able to see and understand what that plan is before I made a decision. Because you're right, if that is their intention and what they're going to do, maybe that's okay. But you can't tell me that's going to solve the problem of off-street.
Any other comments, questions? I think from my point of view, I think it seems like it'd be safer to take 30 cars off the road, especially with kids around. It'd be safer to be in a parking lot than on the street. So I think I see it being a good thing.
Well, most of them just kind of pull up by the sidewalk.
I mean, the longer term teachers parking.
Oh,
So you get them off the street all day long, and now the streets are more wide open, and then residents could have more parking. It'd be easier for the resident to park if a teacher wasn't taking
but if
up a
that goes
stall.
back to Will's point, we don't know how many, if it's not exclusive teachers parking, and we don't know how many teachers there are and where they're currently parking.
Well, they're gonna be parking somewhere. If they're,
Sure. But there's other parking lots and other
Mhm.
parking areas within their campus facility.
Any other comments, questions? If not, we're open for a motion. Yes, Mr. Warner?
Just want to point out something. I'm looking, if you could pull up the aerial.
Right.
How do I get the screen?
I do want to point out that this is, their other option for building an off-street parking lot would be adjacent to the school where their current playground is located, and they would be allowed to do that by right, and that does not require a CUP because it would be considered an accessory parking lot. So if they build it, if they built the parking lot in place of the playground, which is next to the school, they could do that by right. That would mean they would have to move the playground to another location, potentially across 7th Street. So have the playground across 7th Street.
And that was,
Okay.
that was described in the staff report about being a potential safety hazard of crossing the street for the playground, yeah. Remember that. I was going to point out just on the aerial, that shows all the parking, the angled parking on both sides of Clay Street that shows, and I'm assuming that's all staff parking. This looks like it was taken in the middle of the day. So it looks, I don't know if that's a staff parking lot on the corner right there, the southeast corner near the front of the building, but all the diagonal parking along that, we don't know if that's staff or not.
Correct.
So if it was staff, the assumption would be made that all that parking would be moved to the new parking lot, and that would be freed up. And it's a lot easier to pull out of a parking lot going forward than it is to back into traffic on Clay Street when you're leaving. That's just one point I wanted to make.
Thank you.
So.
Any other questions, comments, or motions?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Culp?
just to move things along, I would offer a motion for approval of the CUP at this location, it's a subject property, subject to the conditions set out in the staff report and the adoption of the planning staff's findings and recommendations as those of the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Anyone want to second that?
I would second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any other discussions on the motion? If not, would you please take the vote?
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Ms. Herron?
Aye.
Mr. Kaup?
Aye.
Mr. Nager?
No.
Ms. Pearson?
Nay.
Mr. Tobabin?
Aye.
Mr. Warner?
Aye.
Motion passes with 5 and approving and 2 voting no.
Thank you. Now moving on to public hearing of CU 23-02 Patterson Family Infant Toddler. Staff, would you, Mr. Sharp?
Okay. So yes, this is the proposal requesting a conditional use permit for operation of a daycare facility type 2 located on the southwest corner of Lott Street and Wisconsin Avenue in the Central Highland Park neighborhood. The parcel is approximately 0.44 acre in size, and the parcel has remained vacant for a few years now. See, sorry. Okay, getting into the zoning a little bit, the property is located within an R2 single-family area. Again, it's inside the Highland Park neighborhood. Daycare facility type 1 is a permitted use in the R2 district. However, CUP is required for a daycare facility type 2. You can see that, yeah, it's surrounded by R2 zoning. The C2 commercial lot located on the corner just south, that is the existing daycare run by Melissa Patterson. The C2 zoning actually came from a grocery store that used to be located on that site years ago, and the zoning stayed with the property. Getting into the future land use of the area, again, per the Central Highland Park future land use map, this area is projected to stay a residential single family. There is a little bit of open space where the Jayhawk Park is. It's a tiny park to the northwest of the corner. Getting into a little bit about the daycare itself, statement of operations. The daycare is going to specialize in children 6 weeks to 2.5 years. Maximum occupancy for children being served will be 28. Services will include early education, family events, outreach, and food donations. Again, they're partnering with other organizations in the neighborhood and across the city with TARC, USD 501, Child Care Aware, and hours of operation will be that of a daycare. So for hours of operation being from 7 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Conditions of approval of the CUP address traffic flow, landscaping, and building design standards to help keep the property suited to the character of the neighborhood. On the packet submittal that was submitted to you, the planning commissioners, that is the original site plan in the packet submittal. What's on the PowerPoint is the revised site plan. It stays very similar to the original, with the exceptions of reversing the traffic flow. The traffic is now going to come in on the north side, exit on the south, and have that angled parking from the north to the south. Setbacks are labeled along with landscaping, and it has the required landscaping points. Off-street parking, 5 parking spaces are required, and they provide for 5 parking spaces on the site plan. And staff is recommending approval along with recommendations attached to the staff report, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp. Are there any questions for staff? So, Mr. Nager?
Those 2 lots between the southern, like, existing portion and the northern new portion, those are occupied single-family homes?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? If not, we'll open it up to the applicant presentation. Is there a representative of the applicant to speak on that matter?
I'm Melissa Patterson, the current owner of Patterson Family Child Care Center that is located south of the project area.
Are there any questions for, questions for the applicant?
Do you guys have any questions? We're looking at opening another, you know how childcare is a need. We currently have 28 children in our current location, which are 2 weeks to 5 years of age. And we are looking at opening up another center just to care for infants and toddlers. We do have families who have infants who are not able to place their children with us because we are at max. And we just think that it would be really good for the community to open up another child care center to serve more children.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Mr. Nager?
Do you anticipate much like foot traffic of either staff or the children between like the southern portion and the northern portion?
No. Because of the ages, we're going to have the infants and toddlers will be at the northern portion, and we'll just continue with preschool age children. There might be families who have to drop off at one center and the other center, but I don't propose that they would be on foot. They may if it's weather's nice, but dropping off at one to another, they probably do it by car.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Culp, did you have a question?
Quick question, the number of kids, toddlers and infants, total 28 that will go into the new facility.
Yes, just a total of 28.
Is that the maximum for the licensure?
That will be the maximum that I request.
I'm sorry?
That's the maximum that I will be requesting, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Next, we'll open it up to public testimony. Is there anybody in the audience who'd like to speak on this case? You'd have four minutes.
Hi, my name is Tiara Patterson. I'm currently an employee at Patterson Family Child Care Center, and I just want to speak to the quality of the program. It's, as far as child care centers go, I believe that it is potentially one of the best in Topeka, as far as not only the way that the students are cared for, but also the staff. I believe that Patterson Family Child Care Center is really good at retaining staff. And in the increase of jobs, that's also a good thing. But retaining staff, I know in childcare can be hard. It's just a hard field to be in, but Melissa Patterson always takes care of the staff and, of course, always puts the students first. Not to mention the ways that she reaches out to the community. We said that we get food donations, that we donate to families and other people, even in that community that she reaches out to, neighbors and things like that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public members who'd like to speak on the case? If not, we will close the public testimony and move on to discussion by commissioners. Any further discussion? And if not, I'll be open for a motion.
I would move to recommend to the governing body approval of the conditional use permit, CU 2302, subject to the conditions stated in the staff report.
Thank you. Have a second?
Second.
Mr. Culp. Been moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion on the case?
Great need for this type of facility. Everybody recognizes that, so, you know, we should Godspeed.
I would concur. Would you please take the vote?
Mr. Warner?
Aye.
Mr. Tobobbin?
Aye.
Ms. Pearson?
Aye.
Mr. Nager?
Aye.
Mr. Kaup?
Aye.
Ms. Herron?
Aye.
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Next, we're moving on to PUD 23-03 Eugene and Paramore. And this one was brought back to us from the City Council. And staff, would you like to give us a presentation on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this slide that should be up now. Okay.
I need a smaller gut. Can't reach far enough.
Thank you.
That's fine on me.
I will lean over very far. Okay. So actions taken thus far on this item. Planning Commission held and closed the public hearing on March 20, 2023. Commission voted 8-0 unanimously to recommend approval to the governing body at that meeting. The city staff received protest petitions per state law, per our local ordinance, requiring a 3/4 vote of governing body to approve the rezone. Governing body, this was put on their May 2nd agenda, and they voted to remand this item back to the Planning Commission to consider 4 issues: the character of the neighborhood, the connection to Sproaton Lane, the need for a traffic study, and stormwater drainage. So just some facts about the project. The subject property is 7.2 acres. This is a PUD to allow for duplexes and quadplexes for a total of 30 dwellings, no more, on a privately owned cul-de-sac at a length greater than 500 feet. The reason that's noted is that's something that will have to be addressed as part of a subdivision plat. Beyond the decision on the zoning, what will be required is a subdivision plat and site plan approval, and a lot of the details can be addressed as part of that. Staff is recommending approval with conditions, and that's all in the staff report. The existing zoning of this property is R1 single-family dwelling, as is the property around it. The land south of Soldier Creek is a PUD with commercial uses, and that includes Dillon's and Walmart. What this project involves is rezoning the PUD with M2 multiple family dwelling district use group, but the site density, the site design, the density, the dimensions, building design is regulated by the PUD master plan. So it's rezoning to allow for duplexes and quadplexes, but it's subject to these conditions. The Land Use and Growth Management Plan is the city's comprehensive land use plan. It designates this area for urban, suburban, low-density residential. That means single or two-family development with a maximum overall density of 6 dwelling units per acre. The proposed zoning is consistent with the Land Use and Growth Management Plan, in part due to the PUD limit on the density and other requirements. In addition to that, the citywide housing market study, which is a housing study and plan adopted by the governing body, identifies a need for diversity of housing, including duplexes and fourplexes, what's referred to in that study as the missing middle. This is the master plan itself. What this demonstrates is the general layout of the buildings. As you can see, the rear of the buildings faces outward, so the rear yards match the rear yards to the land in the north, and the setbacks will be in accordance with that. What this also shows is that the PUD doesn't quite go all the way to the east. The boundary of it does not actually touch Sprouton Lane or Sproaton Lane. This is the design concept that's referenced in the PUD. What you can see here is that these are single-story duplexes and quadplexes with garages for parking. There's a lot of architectural detail, gable roofs. So on to the issues that you're being asked to consider more giving further consideration to based on the remand direction. First of all, in the staff report, staff did address the character of the neighborhood. It's one of the golden factors. It's in the report. It was in the report that was presented to you at the earlier meeting. But also, I just want to point out the conditions and the restrictions on the PUD master plan. They reference those design plans, and there's a condition that would say any construction would have to be in substantial conformance with those plans. Next bullet, limited to no more than 30 units for a density of 4.2 units per acre. A lower density than is required for single-family residential development under the current zoning. It requires fencing at a minimum height of 4 feet where the property abuts adjacent existing residential use. That is not a requirement under current zoning. So if someone builds houses, they're not required to build fences around them. There are also specific landscape requirements as a buffer for adjacent residential uses. Again, that's not a requirement under current zoning. It's only a requirement under this proposed PUD master plan. And as I mentioned before, the buildings are oriented, so the rear yards are adjacent to the existing residential development north of the site. So the units will be facing inward toward one another. One thing I want to point out is I think there's some concern based on some of the testimony that's been given that you have duplex zoning or multifamily zoning adjacent to single-family residential zoning. This is actually not uncommon. Recent decisions have been made to permit this. There are many examples. I'm going to show you several examples, and these are all in southwest Topeka. There are some located in other parts of Topeka as well. So this one is near Southwest 21st and Indian Hills. And that's M1 zoning directly adjacent to R1 zoning. And those have been built out as duplexes. Again, not with design controls. This is straight zoning. So here's another one at near Southwest 21st and Wanamaker. And as this zoning map shows, there's M1 zoning immediately adjacent to R1 zoning. Here's a location at 37th and Fairlawn, and another one at 37th and Gage. And this is what the zoning map looks like. The one on the left is, generally it's northwest of the intersection of 37th and Fairlawn. There's a real mix of housing types in that location. And some of this is PUD zoning, some of it's straight zoning. The one on the right is north, well, it's on both sides of the street, actually. It's on the west side of, well, it's on three corners, actually. Three corners of the Gage and 37th intersection. Here's another location where there is M1 zoning and actually M2 zoning under a PUD that's immediately adjacent to R1. And this one is just northwest of the intersection of Wanamaker and Southwest 29th. And you can see the, I don't know if I can, that doesn't work. You can see that those are apartment complexes on the, I'm not sure what that street is, but kind of on the bottom left, those are apartment complexes. The zoning is PUD M2, and it's adjacent to R1, single family. This is a project you recently saw and made a recommendation on and was approved by the governing body. It's a PUD with M1 uses at the intersection of 41st and Wanamaker, and that's what the zoning map looks like. So what you can see is there's some existing M1 that's adjacent to R1, and then you have the PUD with M1 uses. So to address the issue about the connection to Northwest Sproaton Lane, just to be clear, the owners and residents north of the subject property oppose the connection to Sproaton Lane. The project does not include any street or other vehicular connection to Sproaton Lane. Per fire code, a development limited to 30 dwellings is allowed a single point of vehicular access from Rochester Road without a need for secondary access. The subject property does not abut Sproaton Lane or Walnut Lane. Staff is recommending access be provided to the east boundary of the subject property for a potential future connection to the south end of Sproaton Lane, but that is for pedestrian access, not for vehicular access. This is a measure that is consistent with policy and planning for a pedestrian connectivity, safety, and active, healthy living for people that walk. Addressing the need for a traffic study. So one thing I want to mention is our traffic engineering staff is here, Lee Holmes and Jim Jessel. And there's also a technical memo from Mr. Jessel that's attached to the staff report that addresses the estimated traffic volume. So as before, the requirement for a traffic study is not recommended. Per the city traffic engineering staff, a traffic impact analysis is not required due to the limited traffic volume generated by the development. Traffic does not meet the thresholds for a TIA per the applied guidelines. The estimated traffic volume, and this is based on the Institute of Traffic Engineering or Transportation Engineers Manual, estimated traffic volume for this project is 286 vehicles per day. Estimated peak hour volumes are 32 in the AM and 33 in the PM, and that includes traffic going in both directions. The estimated traffic volume on Rochester Road at the site currently is 6,800 vehicles per day. The traffic volume from the proposed development is 3.9% of the current traffic volume on Rochester Road. So there is some new information that was not known and shared with you at the previous meeting. That is that Shawnee County does have plans for a project to improve Rochester Road in 2029 to 2031. That may include widening Rochester Road. At this time, we don't know for sure, but it may include widening it to, say, 3 lanes, two one directional lanes, and then a center turn lane. So to address stormwater drainage, this is the floodway map, or excuse me, the floodplain map. This is the FEMA map. Just a little explanation here. Flood hazards are mapped by FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. FEMA's flood map is used for local regulatory purposes. It's not an arbitrary decision. Development restrictions apply to the 100-year floodplain and the floodway. Development restrictions do not apply to the 500-year floodplain. The subject property, as shown on this map, is not located in any of the mapped flood areas, any of the mapped flood hazard areas. There's a close-up of it. So one thing that you might be able to kind of see is there's a levee that surrounds Soldier Creek, and that levee ends to the east of the property, and that's why, and the flood map reflects that fact. So there was some information that was provided by neighboring property owners that was in the packet at the last meeting. There's some confusion potentially about that information that was provided. There are images shown of flooding of streets, flooding in front yards, that type of thing. There's also an image, and this is in your staff report, of Soldier Creek. The photo is taken from Rochester at the bridge looking east. And as that photo shows, the water in Soldier Creek is very close to the top of the levee. So we asked a little bit more about that. We got in touch with the North Topeka Drainage District. They provided us with some information that shows that the 2005 flooding, which was pretty substantial, this map shows where that occurred. So that area kind of in the center, that is along Half Day Creek, and that is not protected by a levee. The area on the far left, the water actually overtopped the levee, went over the south side of the levee and flooded that area. I guess I'm not sure what else is important about this, just to be clear that those photos that showed flooding of streets were not of this particular area. Also about stormwater drainage, a stormwater management plan by the developer will be required with the subdivision plat and site plan review. The stormwater management plan restricts the amount of drainage that's allowed to run off the site post-development. There's also an erosion control plan that's required. That's during development. But the stormwater management plan really addresses what happens post-development. Any ground disturbance of 1 acre or more also requires the stormwater management plan to include best management practices to treat stormwater runoff entering the city's stormwater system. And that concludes the slides. I'll be happy to answer questions if you have any. And as I mentioned, our engineering staff are here as well to take questions about traffic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Are there any questions for staff? Mr. Culp?
Mike, a couple questions. First about the drainage issue. And I don't recall this being discussed specifically at the hearing. The North Topeka, excuse me, the North Topeka Drainage District, they have certain authority with respect to development within their jurisdiction. Is that?
Within a certain distance of the levee, I believe that requires that the Corps of Engineers reviews development within a certain distance of the levee. I believe that's 500 feet.
And has that happened?
Not yet. I don't believe that's happened.
So-
That would normally happen as part of site plan review.
Oh.
And I'm going to refer to the staff report. I don't believe that's happened.
But it's the Corps of Engineers that do that review, not the drainage district?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, it is from North. Okay, so Dan just pointed out to me, in the staff recommendation, one of the recommendations is that a note be added to the master plan, stating that the property is within 500 feet of the Soldier Creek levee and thus review and approved by North Topeka Drainage District be required. And I think they do it in concert with the Corps. I'm not really sure, honestly, how that works, but
That was in
that's
the
something
original staff report?
That's something that still has to be, and that is in the staff report.
And Mike, the first thing I got out of sequence here, the first thing I wanted to mention was I thought that this summary here, it's short, but it's very good. It's very well done. There's a lot of good information in here. So thank you for who all was involved in doing this. The other question I had related to the character of the neighborhood. And I do recall there was a good amount of discussion about what the property owner could do under the existing zoning. And I think it's in that staff report, the density for the R1 would allow up to 45 single-family dwellings on that property, given the acreage.
So I'm going to respond to that and add a little more information after taking a closer look at this. I'm going to add a little more information to that. We talked about this at the previous meeting. So theoretically, yeah, that much density. Most of the zoning districts have an absolute limit on density. In the R1 district, it's a function of lot size and other requirements, like other improvements like streets. So anytime you put a street on property, that's going to take away land that you can develop. The land, each of the lots has to be 6,500 square feet and have a width of 60 feet unless there are variances. So my estimate in just looking at how deep that land is and how the width of lots is that the most you're probably going to get on there is 32 to 35 single-family homes, detached single-family homes.
You said 32 to 35.
32 to 35.
Okay.
If you look at the dimensions, again, I'm not the designer, I'm not the engineer, I'm not the surveyor. I didn't create the plat. They'll have to do that if it comes to single family.
Well, you can do the math better than I can, so
But
that's good. That's good
yeah.
information. In the R1 zone, what is the maximum height for residents?
I believe it's 45 feet.
Which could be as much as a 3-story house.
Yes.
And the applicant here has committed to a one-story structures.
Their design plans are for one-story structures. So to be very clear, there's no note that's recommended saying it has to be a single-story structure. It says in substantial conformance with. So let's say he comes back and wants to do a 1.5-story. That's probably in substantial conformance with what's being shown. 2-story, maybe not. So if there's a concern about being more specific, that's probably something the developer would be amenable to because he has plans to build those plans that are attached. But right now, as recommended, it says in substantial conformance with those design plans. One thing that is specific, however, is that the recommendation says that there be a note that each unit have garages and articulated modulated facades and gable roofs. And those are design controls that do not apply necessarily as a requirement for detached single-family development is permitted by right under the current zoning.
Well, I asked the question, Mike, because it seemed like there were a number of folks that were concerned about the development might overwhelm the area. And if there was some assurance that the scale of the properties were down to, 15 feet high, 20 feet high, as opposed to, you said 45?
45 is
Yeah.
the max.
That might give that might be viewed as significant by some people that are concerned about the project.
Any other questions? Nager?
That staff idea for a pedestrian and bike connection to Sproaton, is that incorporated into the plan as it is, or would we have to take a step to incorporate that? Is that just like a potential suggestion?
That's in the recommendation as a condition that a note be added to the master plan that would require that.
Okay.
So it's in the recommendation. It's not on the master plan that's attached to the packet.
All right. And then for the traffic study, I understand that it doesn't meet those thresholds that we usually do, and it's gonna be estimated around 3.9% of the traffic. What are the thresholds that we usually live by?
Commissioner, there should be a TIA guidelines document attached to your report. So if you can give me just a moment.
Table 2. Yep. Table 2 on the.
It's mentioned in the technical memo, and our traffic engineer can speak to it too if you have questions.
All right, thank you. Oh, and then my last question was about the county may be including a third lane, but they're definitely doing improvements. Is that right?
They have a plan. It's not designed yet. It depends somewhat on revenue collected. It's a sales tax project. And so at some point it'll go into design. And I believe that's in the comment made by Kurt Niehaus, Public Works Director at the county. I believe it's on I think it's in the first page of the staff report, or the second page. Yeah, it's on the second page of the staff report, that new section was added. Shawnee County has a sales tax project 2027 to 2031 to reconstruct Rochester Road from the north end of Walmart to 50th Road. If we can fit everything in, there will be 3 lanes, center continuous all-turn, curb and gutter, sidewalk, multi-use path, enclosed drainage, a bridge widening, and possibly 2 roundabouts, 35th and possibly 50th. They'll bring a consultant on board in mid to late 2026 with design starting in 2027. And then the construction is likely to take 3 years.
Thank you. And then my last question, I believe, is with the protest petition, I don't believe that it would risk taking it beyond the threshold for that. But I noticed that there were multiple deceased individuals. included on that protest petition? Is that standard?
Well, there could be estates, so
Right.
there could be property names that are in a state, as long as they're signed by someone who can sign for them. And our city attorney might be able to answer that question better, but we looked at that and we found that it was a valid protest.
All right.
That does not affect your vote, it affects the governing body's vote.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.
Question for staff again. Did I understand it correctly that with 30 units, a cul-de-sac is permissible, but if you exceed that number of units, then you need a secondary access? Did I read that correctly in here?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Also, I guess if it were to stay R1 zoning and develop that way, I mean, does this proposal actually provide a little more spacing between building units than the R1 single family would? I mean, because I know a view shed has been brought up as an issue, and I just wondered if this actually provides more of a gap between those buildings. Just a question.
So Commissioner, if you look at the master plan,
Mm-hmm.
that's a pretty conceptual drawing. It looks like there's a lot of open space, a lot of space
Right.
between buildings. I wouldn't want to guarantee that that's what it's
Okay.
going to look like. With R1 zoning, the setbacks, the side setbacks are 6 feet,
Okay.
7 feet, 7 feet. So it's 14 feet between houses.
Buildings. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Mr. Culp?
Thank you. Mike, just one more follow-up question, and maybe this is for the traffic engineers, but on the need for traffic study, the information that's been provided here, we have at least a limited traffic study based on the estimates. I'm not quite sure what a full-blown traffic study would add to the analysis that's in here.
You could call this a small traffic study because it involves some assumptions, some numbers, and some analysis. But I think the second part of your question, what would a real traffic study entail? I think our staff can answer that. Our traffic engineering folks can answer that question.
Without getting way into the weeds, right?
I'm Lee Holmes, and I'm the project engineer, and we've hired Finish to be our consulting engineer, traffic engineer as well, to review traffic impact analysis, other traffic issues. So I'm going to let that.
I'm Jim Jussel with Finish. To answer your question on what would be required in a true traffic study, it wouldn't be much more than what we did right here, honestly. Typically, you would do a turning movement counts at intersections, but for this size of development, you're not going to get much different recommendations out of it, because you want to know what the trip gens are being generated by, the number of units, and what the amount of traffic on the roadway. And in my opinion, a traffic study would not be required for this. And
In the write-up here, there's a reference made to a recent traffic study that was done. When was that done? Do you know?
Actually, just a couple months ago, and it's down at 25th and Rochester. So we took the counts from that study to estimate the traffic to the north.
Okay. Pretty recent.
Yes.
Any other questions for staff? And this is not a public testimony thing, so we're into the discussion by commissioners. So I'll just mention that since I live not too far from here, north of it. Since this came back, I've watched the city council meeting in detail. I've gone through all the paperwork again, and I've visited the neighborhood a few times. I've taken photos. I've done some more research. So when it comes down to the character in the neighborhood, I think it's pointed out that it currently could be a lot taller houses and closer together, and this actually is better than I think than if it were not, if it were single family. Not that they would necessarily do it, but they could without any of this. So I feel better about that. It is a nice, very nice neighborhood north of there, but I don't think that what I've seen that this would not be, it's going to be different because it's newer. So it's going to look newer. But I think over time it'll develop and fit in well with the neighborhood. The connection to Sproaton Lane, we're not connecting to it, so I don't think that's a problem or an issue that would be having extra traffic on the existing neighborhood. So I feel comfortable with that. I'm happy, really happy to see that the county has a plan for redoing Rochester all the way to 50th, because there's a lot of traffic on it. I drive it a lot, and so I'm happy to see that that's in the works in the plan. And I can't imagine them not adding turn lanes closer to the south end of that development. So that made me feel better about the traffic, and also about the information here, the traffic information, the number of cars that was provided after the fact. That made me feel better about it. And the drainage, I was around for the flood also, and some of the photos actually, makes me, the levees held in 05, so they did their job. It was pretty close to the top, but they did their job, and it flooded down upstream, before it actually topped the levee. So that almost makes me feel better, because if they got that water coming down, it's probably going to go closer to the 75 highway like it did in 05. So, and I'm not one to, I think the Corps of Engineers, they're pretty good with their flood studies. And insurances, a lot of those insurances are based off that. So if insurance companies thought that would be a problem, I think the whole neighborhood would probably have required to pay more in insurance. So I went through each of those 4 items myself and reconsidered them and looked at all the information. I looked at I read through the neighborhood letters again, and so I still feel comfortable with how I voted last time. I don't see that I would change it. So that's just kind of wanted to put that out there, and I didn't just show up and vote again. I actually put some time into it, and so I still kind of feel the same way. So. We'd be open for any other discussions or motions.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to cut off any debate or discussion with the commission, but if you're ready for a motion, I would offer one.
I'd be ready for a motion.
Mary, this is probably will sound like a conceptual motion, okay?
Okay, sure.
But my motion, Mr. Chairman, would be that the Planning Commission report its reconsideration of this matter back to the governing body, that Planning Commission stands by its earlier recommendation to approve the PUD, and this was after receiving additional new information from planning staff, and we would incorporate the staff report here, is dated June 26, as part of our recommendation to the governing body. Conceptual, right?
Correct. You're essentially moving to resubmit your original recommendation.
Right. In 5 words or less, yeah.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any other discussions on the motion? Not seeing any. Would you please take the vote?
Mr. Dean?
Aye.
Ms. Herron?
Aye.
Mr. Kaut,
Aye.
Mr. Nager,
Aye.
Ms. Pearson,
Aye.
Mr. Tobobbin,
Aye.
and Mr. Warner.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Is there any communication from staff?
Commissioners, we don't technically have that on the agenda, but there's one thing I want to ask again. It's been a little while since this question was asked. We're going to put together a work group to study accessory dwelling units in the city. And I just want to ask again, do any of you want to be on that work group? Probably can't have more than 2 as things go. So is anybody interested? 1, 2, 3. Okay. I'll figure it out.
Rock, paper, scissors tonight. All right. If not, that's it, then we are adjourned. Thank you.